Welcome, biology student, to lecture 7-3, Cell Boundaries. Class, student, this is a challenging chapter because some of the concepts are challenging. So I encourage you to make sure you have a piece of paper, your book out, a quiet environment, and at least a half an hour, maybe 35 minutes to knock this out. Okay, our objectives today are to identify the main functions of the cell membrane and the cell wall. We want to describe what happens during diffusion and explain the process of osmosis, facilitated diffusion, and active transport. Your learning activity lecture exercises are page 188, numbers 1 through 6, or connecting concepts. Now, class, student, do the one that you think will help you the most. Okay, let's turn in our books to page 182. And let's start reading together. Our key concepts are: what are the functions of the cell membrane and the cell wall? What happens during diffusion? And what is osmosis? If you know these three key concepts, you'll be good. For our quiz, cell membrane, cell wall, lipid bilayer, concentration diffusion, equilibrium, osmosis, isotonic, hypertonic, hypotonic, facilitated diffusion, active transport, endocytosis, phagocytosis, and pinocytosis, and finally exocytosis are our vocabulary words. Wow, Mr. Worley, so many. I know, but you can do it. Furthermore, this is the end of major vocabulary for this chapter. Yay! Okay, let's keep reading. When you first study a country, are you following along with me? Are you pointing your finger in the book? Or are you just spacing out? Don't do the latter. When you first study a country, you may begin by examining a map of the country's borders. Before you can learn anything about the nation, it is important to understand where it begins and where it ends. The same principle applies to a cell. Among the most important parts of the cell are its borders, which separate the cell from its surroundings. All cells are surrounded by a thin, flexible barrier known as the cell membrane. Vocab word! Many cells also produce a strong supporting layers around them called the cell wall. Whoa! Mr. Worley, class, do you remember that cell walls are only around what kind of cell? Plant cell, plant cell, plant cell, says the students. Good job. Cell membrane. The cell membrane regulates what enters and leaves the cell and also provides protection and support. What does the cell membrane do? That could be a quiz question. The composition of nearly all cell membranes is a double-layered sheet called the lipid bilayer. Remember, lipid means fat. Bi means two, layer means two layers. Lipid bilayer, the fat two layers. As you can see in figure 712, there are two layers of lipids, hence the name lipid bilayer. The lipid bilayer gives cell membranes a flexible structure that forms a strong barrier between the cell and its surroundings. In addition, let's move down. In addition to lipids, most cell membranes contain protein molecules that are embedded in the lipid bilayer. Carbohydrate molecules are attached to many of these proteins. In fact, there are so many kinds of molecules in cell membranes that scientists describe the membranes as a mosaic of different molecules. Mosaic are those little pictures made of thousands of little pieces of glass. A mosaic is a work of art made of individual tiles or other pieces assembled to form a picture or design. As you will see, some of the proteins form channels and pumps that help to move the material across the cell membranes. Many of the carbohydrates act like chemical identification cards, allowing individual cells to identify one another. Look at this awesome thing. It's called the lipid bilayer. Each one of these kind of brown dots things represent proteins. Each protein has a separate job. This protein pumps things in and out of the cell. This protein helps identify the cell to other cells. The lipid bilayer keeps everything separate. What is a lipid? Maybe what is a phospholipid? Go back to a few chapters back and find out. Move on to page 182. Cell walls. Cell walls are present in many organisms, including plants, algae, fungi, and many prokaryotes. Cell walls lie outside the cell membrane. Most cell walls are porous enough to allow water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and certain other substances to pass through easily. Porous means wholly, or has holes in them. The main function of the cell wall is to provide support and protection for the cell. What is the main function of the cell wall? Great quiz question. You should put it on pause and take some notes. Are you writing notes in a separate section of your paper under cell walls? Most cell walls are made from fibers or carbohydrates and proteins. These substances are produced within the cell and then released to the surface of the cell membrane, where they are assembled to form the wall. Plant cell walls are composed of mostly cellulose, a tough carbohydrate fiber. Cellulose is the principal component of both wood and paper, so every time you pick up a sheet of paper, you are holding the stuff of cell walls in your hand. Ooh, cell walls. Feels so good. Anyway, moving right along. New section in your notes. Diffusion. I just make that diffusion stop. Every living cell exists in a liquid environment that needs to survive. It may not always seem that way, yet even in the dust and heat of the desert, like the one in figures 7 to 13, the cells of the cactus plant, scorpions, and vultures are bathed in liquid. One of the most important functions of the cell membrane is to regulate the movement of dissolved molecules from the liquid on one side of the membrane to the liquid on the other side. Ooh, function of the cell. What could that be? Function of the cell wall. Measuring concentrations. Moving right along. The cytoplasm of the cell contains a solution of many different Mr. Worley, what is a cytoplasm? That is the liquid inside the cell. A cell contains a solution of many different substances in water. Recall that a solution is a mixture of two or more substances. The substance dissolved in the solution are called solutes. The concentration of a solution is the mass of the solute in a given volume of solution, or mass over volume. For example, if you dissolve 12 grams of salt in 3 liters of water, the concentration of the solution would be a 12 gram to 3 liters, or 4 grams to the liter, grams per liter. If you had 12 grams of salt in 6 liters of water, the concentration would be 12 grams to 6 liters, or 2 grams to the liter. The first solution is twice as concentrated as the second. This is very simple. It's telling you what concentration is. It's the amount of solute you put into solvent by mass. So 12 grams to 6 liters, or 2 grams to the liter. Here, a daily example, if you ever drink coffee or beverage, how many grams of sugar do you put in a cup of your solute, the solvent? All right, please move along with me to the next page, page 184. If you need a break, take a break, put me on pause, and write some notes. Make sure you get all of the vocabulary words down. Moving right along. Here's our first major concept. It's called diffusion. Diffusion. Here we go. Diffusion. Diffusion. In a solution, particles move constantly. They collide with one another and tend to spread out randomly. As a result, the particles tend to move from an area where they are more concentrated to an area where they are less concentrated, a process known as diffusion. This is a great quiz question. What is diffusion? Particles moving from a high concentration to a low concentration. When the concentration of the solute is the same throughout a system, the system has reached equilibrium, or balance. Another great vocab word. Check out figure 14. Figure 14, in the first picture, there is more solute molecules on one side of the membrane than there are on the other side. There is a higher concentration. In picture B, solute particles move from the side of the membrane which a high concentration of solute to the side where there is a low concentration of solute. The solute particles will continue to diffuse across the membrane until equilibrium is reached. And here is equilibrium, where the same amount of particles going to one side is equal to the same amount of particles going to the other side. Balance. Diffusion, going from a high concentration to a low concentration. Okay, so what do diffusion and equilibrium have to do with cell membranes? Suppose a substance is present in unequal concentrations on either side of the cell membrane, as shown in figure 7.14. If the substance can cross the cell membrane, its particles will tend to move towards the area where it is less concentrated until equilibrium is reached. At that point, the concentration of the substance on both sides of the cell will be the same. Key point, because diffusion depends on random particle movements, substances diffuse across membranes without requiring the cell to use energy. So in diffusion, there is no need for energy. Hello, this is Mr. Worley. Hello, Mr.